The restaurant wasn't fancy, no soft music, no dim lights, no dramatic atmosphere. Just the usual sounds, plates clinking, people talking over each other, a bell ringing from the kitchen every few seconds. The kind of place people came to eat quickly, pay, and forget about. Keanu Reeves sat alone in a corner booth, not the version people expected. No tailored suit, no sunglasses, no bodyguards standing nearby. Just a plain dark jacket, worn boots, and a quiet posture that blended into the background. To anyone else, he looked like another tired customer who'd stopped by for dinner after a long day. He ordered a steak, medium rare, nothing special. While he waited, he didn't check his phone. He didn't look around impatiently. He didn't seem in a rush. He simply sat there, hands resting on the table, observing the room without staring at anyone in particular. The waitress came over with his plate. She was young, too young to look this exhausted. Her movements were quick, almost rehearsed, the kind that come from doing the same thing over and over without rest. She forced a polite smile as she placed the steak in front of him, but it faded the moment she thought no one was watching. As she set down the plate, her sleeve slid up slightly, just for a second. Keanu noticed it. Faint bruises, not old enough to fade, not new enough to still be red. His eyes didn't widen, his expression didn't change. But something in him went still. The waitress adjusted her sleeve quickly, as if she'd realized too late. Her fingers trembled just enough to be noticeable, if someone was paying attention. Most people weren't. She reached for the checkbook, ready to step away when she hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the counter, then toward the kitchen, then, finally back to Keanu. For a brief moment, their eyes met. It wasn't long, it wasn't dramatic, but it was deliberate. She slid a folded piece of paper onto the edge of the plate, right beside the steak knife. Her hand lingered there for half a second longer than necessary. Then she whispered, barely audible over the noise of the restaurant, "Please, read this when I walk away." And just like that, she straightened up and moved on to the next table, her pace faster than before. The paper stayed where it was. Keanu didn't touch it. Not yet. Around him, nothing had changed. People laughed. Someone complained about their order. A family argued quietly over dessert. The world kept moving, completely unaware that something fragile had just been placed on a stranger's table. Keanu cut into his steak slowly, as if nothing unusual had happened. But his attention wasn't on the food anymore. It was on the folded note, on the way the waitress avoided looking back, on the tension in her shoulders as she worked. Whatever was written on that paper, it wasn't casual. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a mistake. And it definitely wasn't meant for just anyone. For the first time since sitting down, Keanu Reeves knew this meal was no longer about food. And whatever was coming next was going to change far more than his dinner. The restaurant kept moving like nothing had happened. Orders were shouted toward the kitchen. Plates slid across counters. Someone laughed too loudly at a joke that wasn't that funny. The smell of grilled meat and frying oil hung heavy in the air, mixing with the sound of impatience and routine. This place didn't pause for anyone, and that was exactly why Keanu had chosen it. He didn't come here to be noticed. He didn't come for attention or special treatment. Places like this were honest. People didn't perform. They didn't pretend to be polite for celebrities they didn't recognize. Everyone showed their real face when they were tired, rushed, or under pressure. Keanu stayed still in his booth, shoulders relaxed, posture unremarkable. If anyone glanced his way, their eyes slid past him almost immediately. He was invisible, just another quiet man eating alone. The folded note remained untouched beside his plate. Across the room, the waitress moved from table to table, her steps quick, her smile appearing and disappearing on command. She laughed when customers joked. She apologized when plates were late. She nodded even when people spoke to her without looking up. But something about her had changed. She avoided one specific area of the restaurant now. She kept her distance from the counter longer than necessary. And every few minutes, she glanced toward the door, not with hope, but calculation. Keanu noticed all of it, not because he was searching for drama, but because he had learned, over years of life and work, that patterns never lie. Near the counter stood the manager, mid-40s, forced authority, the kind of man who spoke softly but expected immediate obedience. His eyes didn't scan the room the way someone checking on customers would. They followed staff. Every movement, every pause, every mistake. When the waitress slowed down, his jaw tightened. When she laughed at a customer's joke, his expression hardened, like her smile cost him something. Keanu didn't stare. He didn't need to. He had seen this type before, not just in roles, but in real life. People who didn't raise their voice because they didn't have to. People who controlled through pressure, not force. The waitress passed Keanu's table again, carrying 2 full plates. She didn't look at him this time. Her shoulders were stiff, her breathing shallow, like she was counting steps in her head. The folded note was still there. Keanu took a sip of water. Slow, calm. From the outside, nothing about him suggested urgency. But inside, his attention sharpened. Every sound, every movement in the room seemed slightly louder, slightly clearer. This wasn't a crisis yet, but it was close. At the booth behind him, a couple argued quietly about money. At another table, a man snapped his fingers to get service. No one noticed the tension slowly tightening in the air. That's how it usually happened. Not with shouting, not with chaos, with normality. The manager leaned toward the waitress as she passed. He said something too quietly for anyone else to hear. She nodded immediately. Too quickly. Her hands shook as she reached for the receipt printer. Keanu's jaw tightened just a fraction. Still, he didn't touch the note. Not yet, he waited. Because rushing in without understanding the situation didn't help anyone. And because sometimes, the most dangerous thing you could do was act before you saw the full picture. The waitress finally disappeared into the kitchen. The manager's eyes flicked toward Keanu's table. Just once, a short glance, curious, assessing, then he looked away. Keanu knew that look. It wasn't suspicion, it was evaluation. And for the first time since sitting down, Keanu understood something clearly. He wasn't just a customer in this room anymore. He was a variable. A few seconds passed. Then a question began forming in the viewer's mind, the same one Keanu was silently asking himself. If you were in his place, would you open the note right away? Or wait? The answer mattered more than people realized. Because whatever was written on that folded paper wasn't just information. It was trust. And once opened, there would be no pretending nothing had happened. The waitress returned from the kitchen, eyes lower now, movements even faster. She dropped off a drink at another table and almost bumped into a chair. She whispered an apology. No one cared, but Keanu did. He watched her walk past him again, closer this time. Close enough that he could hear her breathing. Too shallow. Too fast. She didn't look at him. But as she passed, she said something under her breath, so quiet it almost disappeared into the noise of the restaurant. Please. One word. That was all. She didn't stop. Didn't turn around. Didn't explain. She just kept walking. Keanu's hand moved, slowly, deliberately, toward the folded note. Not to open it. Just to pull it closer. Because now he knew one thing for certain. Whatever was happening in this restaurant wasn't accidental. And whatever choice he made next would change more than just her night. The waitress kept moving, even when her body clearly wanted to stop. From one table to the next, from one forced smile to another. She had learned long ago that stopping, even for a second, invited questions. And questions led to attention. Attention led to trouble. So she moved. Her name tag said Lena, slightly crooked, like it had been reattached too many times. She wiped down a table that was already clean. Adjusted silverware that didn't need fixing. Anything to keep her hands busy. Anything to avoid standing still. Inside, her thoughts were loud. Too loud. She replayed the moment again and again. The way she had slid the note onto his plate. The way her heart had slammed against her ribs right after. The way fear had rushed in the moment she walked away. She shouldn't have done it. That's what the voice in her head kept saying. But another voice, quieter, weaker, reminded her why she had. Because today had been worse. Not loud, not dramatic, just worse. It started early, before the restaurant even opened. The manager had pointed out a mistake she hadn't made. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't insulted her. He had smiled, and that somehow made it feel heavier. All day he stayed close. Too close. Correcting small things, watching, waiting. Letting her know she was replaceable without ever saying the word. She had learned to read these signals. The tightening jaw. The clipped tone. The way kindness disappeared when no one else was watching. That's why she covered her arms. Not because of pain. Because of questions. Because questions turned into reports. And reports turned into misunderstandings. And misunderstandings somehow always became her fault. She had bills, rent overdue, no backup plan. Walking away wasn't simple. It never was. Lena stopped near the counter, pretending to check orders on the screen. Her reflection stared back at her from the stainless steel surface, pale, tired, older than she should look. She barely recognized herself. Across the room, she felt him before she saw him. The man in the corner booth. quiet, watching, but not in the way others did. Most customers looked through her. Some looked at her. He looked like he was paying attention without demanding anything in return. That scared her. Because noticing meant involvement, and involvement meant consequences. She had chosen him for a reason she couldn't fully explain. Maybe it was the way he didn't rush her order. Maybe it was the way he didn't interrupt. Maybe it was just instinct. The kind that kicks in when options run out. She didn't know who he was. And that was the point. If he ignored the note, she could tell herself she'd imagined everything. That she'd been dramatic. That she just needed to survive another shift. If he read it, there would be no going back. The manager called her name sharply. She flinched before she could stop herself. "Table 7's waiting," he said, eyes fixed on her face. She replied quickly, too quickly. Her hands shook as she grabbed the plates. She felt exposed, not because of the note, but because she had asked. As she passed the corner booth again, she could feel the folded paper still there, untouched, silent, heavy. She wanted him to read it. She didn't want him to read it. Both feelings collided in her chest. She dropped off the plates at table 7 and forced a smile. The customers didn't notice. They were already talking, already distracted. Lena stepped back, breathing shallow, eyes scanning the room. The manager leaned against the counter now, arms crossed. Watching, not yelling, not approaching, just waiting. Waiting for a mistake, waiting for proof that she deserved whatever came next. She felt small, not physically, but internally. Like her voice had been turned down so low she wasn't sure it still existed. That's when it hit her. This wasn't about one shift, or one job. This was about how long she'd been quiet. How long she'd convinced herself that keeping her head down was the same as being safe. She brushed past the corner booth once more, close enough to feel the air move. She didn't look at him, didn't slow down, but she whispered, barely shaping the word with her lips. "Please." It slipped out before she could stop it. And for the first time that night, something shifted. She didn't know if he heard her. She didn't know if he would help. But she knew she couldn't keep pretending nothing was wrong. Lena disappeared into the kitchen again, hands gripping the counter as soon as she was out of sight. Her chest felt tight. Her throat burned. She closed her eyes, just for a second. On the other side of the door, the restaurant buzzed on, unaware, unchanged. But Lena knew something now that she hadn't known before. She wasn't invisible anymore. Someone had noticed. And whether that saved her, or made things worse, would depend entirely on what the man in the corner booth decided to do next. Keanu didn't move right away. The note rested beside his plate, folded neatly, as if it had always belonged there. Anyone passing by would have assumed it was a receipt, or a reminder, or nothing important at all. But Keanu knew better. He had seen moments like this before, not exactly like this, but close enough to recognize the weight of them. Moments where a choice appeared quietly, without instructions, without warning. Moments that didn't announce themselves as important until long after they had passed. He placed his fork down slowly. Around him, the restaurant continued its rhythm. Someone laughed near the window. A glass shattered in the kitchen, followed by quick apologies. Life uninterrupted. Keanu didn't rush. Rushing was how mistakes were made. He let his eyes drift across the room again, not searching, noticing. The manager at the counter, the way staff responded to his presence, the subtle tension that followed certain movements. Power didn't always look loud. Sometimes it looked comfortable. Keanu's fingers brushed the edge of the folded note. He didn't open it yet, not because he was unsure, but because once he did, the situation would change, whether he acted or not. Reading it meant accepting responsibility. It meant acknowledging that someone had placed trust in him without knowing anything about him. That wasn't a small thing. He thought of the waitress, Lena. The way her voice barely formed the word, "Please." The way her body moved like she was trying to take up less space in a room that already ignored her. People like that didn't ask for help easily. They waited until silence became unbearable. Keanu leaned back slightly in his booth, positioning himself so he could see the entrance, the counter, and the path staff used between tables. Not obvious, just aware. This wasn't about playing hero. It was about timing. He had learned long ago that stepping in too early could do more harm than good. Drawing attention without understanding the full picture often shifted consequences onto the person already carrying the weight. So he waited, watched, listened. The manager spoke quietly to another staff member, gesturing toward the kitchen. His tone was calm, controlled. The staff member nodded quickly and walked away. Keanu noted it. The kind of authority that didn't need to raise its voice, often expected obedience without question. And people who lived under that kind of pressure learned to comply automatically. That was the danger. Keanu's hand finally closed around the folded note. He didn't unfold it yet. Instead, he slid it under his plate. A small action, a deliberate one. From the outside, it looked like nothing, but it meant something. It meant he had acknowledged it, and that acknowledgement grounded him. He wasn't acting on impulse anymore. He was choosing to be present. Across the room, Lena emerged from the kitchen again. Her face was composed now, too composed, like someone who had practiced not showing cracks. Their eyes met briefly, just long enough. Keanu gave a slight nod. Nothing dramatic, nothing reassuring, just enough to say, "I see you." Her steps faltered for half a second. Then she kept moving. That was when Keanu decided, not how he would do it. Quietly, carefully, without putting her in the spotlight. He reached for his glass again, taking a slow sip of water, buying time. He listened to the room, not just sounds but patterns. Who interrupted who? Who apologized unnecessarily? Who watched without participating? The manager glanced in his direction again. This time his eyes lingered. Keanu didn't look away. He didn't stare either. He held the gaze just long enough to register, then calmly returned to his meal. A signal, not of threat, but of awareness. The manager's posture shifted slightly. Keanu noticed, and so did the viewer. At this point, would you step by, or keep waiting to see what happens next? There was no right answer, only consequences. Keanu finally slid the note out from beneath the plate and unfolded it just enough to read. He didn't react. No sharp inhale, no change in expression. But something behind his eyes hardened, not with anger, but resolve. The message was short, honest, and unmistakably real. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't exaggeration. This was someone asking to be believed. Keanu folded the note again carefully, placing it back exactly where it had been before. He adjusted his jacket, then stood up slowly, as if heading toward the restroom. No one paid attention. That was the advantage of being invisible. As he walked past the counter, he caught the manager's reflection in the polished surface. Their eyes met again, closer this time. Keanu didn't break stride, but he didn't hurry either. He paused near the hallway, glanced back once toward Lena, then continued. From the outside, it looked ordinary. But inside, the situation had crossed a line. Keanu wasn't observing anymore. He was involved, and whatever he chose to do next wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be aggressive. But it would shift the balance in a room that had been relying on silence for far too long. When Keanu returned to his table, nothing looked different. The lights were the same. The noise level hadn't changed. Plates still moved from kitchen to tables like clockwork. But the feeling in the room was no longer neutral. It was subtle, the kind of shift most people wouldn't notice unless they were inside it. Keanu sat down slowly, placing his hands on the table. The folded note was gone now, tucked safely inside his jacket. His steak sat half-finished, forgotten. Across the room, Lena hesitated near the drink station. She wasn't sure why, but she felt it too. The pressure in the air, the sense that something had begun moving without announcing itself. She glanced toward Keanu's booth. He wasn't watching her. That somehow made it easier to breathe. The manager, however, was watching. He had repositioned himself closer to the center of the restaurant. Not obviously, just enough to see everything at once. His arms were crossed now, his weight shifted to one leg. Control posture. Two nearby customers noticed him before they noticed Keanu. A woman whispered to her friend, nodding toward the counter. A man at the bar frowned, sensing tension without understanding it. People were sensitive to authority, even when they couldn't explain why. Keanu remained still, calm, almost detached. He took another sip of water and set the glass down precisely in the same spot. No wasted movement. That calm was contagious. Lena felt it. As she passed his table again, he spoke quietly, not looking at her, not demanding attention. "Take a breath," he said, barely louder than a whisper. She almost dropped the tray. No one had spoken to her like that all night. Not as an order, not as criticism, as concern. She nodded once and kept moving. Across the room, the manager noticed the exchange. His lips pressed together. He stepped away from the counter and walked toward Lena, intercepting her path. "Kitchen," he said sharply. Not loud, but firm enough. Lena froze for half a second. Every eye wasn't on them yet, but some were. This was the moment. Keanu stood up, not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough to be noticed. Chairs scraped softly. A couple nearby glanced up. A server paused mid-step. The manager turned slightly, irritation flickering across his face. Yes, he said, already annoyed. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't even sound confrontational. Excuse me, he said evenly. The room went quiet. Not silent, but hushed. Conversations faded, forks paused. People looked up, curious now. The manager forced a smile. No problem at all, he replied quickly. Just handling staff issues. Keanu nodded once. I'm sure you are, he said. But you don't need to do it like that. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. The manager's smile tightened. Lena stood frozen between them. Other staff members stopped pretending not to watch. One of them leaned against the counter, arms crossed, suddenly interested. This wasn't private anymore, and the manager knew. You're a customer, he said, tone clipped. Please sit down. Keanu didn't move. I am, he agreed. And I'm also someone who doesn't ignore things when they don't feel right. A man near the window whispered, "What's that?" Another shook his head. No way. Recognition flickered, uncertain but spreading. The manager glanced around, aware of the eyes on him now. His grip on authority loosened, just slightly. That was all it took. Lena's breathing steadied. Her shoulders lowered a fraction. She wasn't alone in this moment. Keanu turned to her gently. Would you like a minute, he asked. She nodded. The manager opened his mouth, then closed it. Because saying anything now would draw more attention. And attention was the one thing he didn't want. He stepped back. The room exhaled. Keanu returned to his booth slowly, deliberately, as if nothing dramatic had just occurred. But the balance had shifted. People whispered openly now. Staff watched the manager more than the customers. Customers watched the manager more than their plates. Power had changed direction, not through force, but exposure. Lena walked toward the kitchen, not rushed this time. She glanced back once. Keanu met her eyes and nodded again. Still calm, still controlled. The manager retreated to the counter, jaw tight, scanning the room like someone who had just lost control without understanding how. Because silence had protected him before, but now, the room was watching, and whatever happened next wouldn't stay hidden. Keanu waited until the room settled into its new rhythm. Not calm, just quieter. People were still talking, still eating, but their voices had dropped. Conversations had softened. Like everyone sensed they were now part of something they didn't fully understand. This was the moment. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded note. The paper was thin, creased from being folded and unfolded too many times before it ever reached him. He could feel the pressure behind it before he even opened it. Keanu unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear it. The handwriting was small, controlled. Like someone trying not to take up too much space even on paper. It read, I don't feel safe here. He watches everything I do. I don't know who else to ask. That was it. No explanations. No dramatic language. Just fear, condensed into 3 short lines. Keanu didn't react outwardly. No sharp breath. No tightening jaw. But inside, the decision he'd been circling finally locked into place. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was someone asking to be believed. He folded the note again and placed it gently on the table, aligning it neatly with the edge. Then he stood. This time he didn't pretend he was going anywhere else. He walked directly to the counter. The manager noticed immediately. He straightened, placing both hands flat on the surface, posture shifting into something professional, defensive. The practiced smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. He asked. Keanu stopped a few feet away, not invading space, not backing down either. Yes, Keanu said calmly. We need to talk. The word need hung there. Not aggressive, not negotiable. The manager glanced around. Too many people were watching now to dismiss him outright. About what? He asked. Keanu placed the folded note on the counter between them. I was given this, he said evenly. By one of your staff. The manager's eyes flicked down, just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. His smile faltered. I don't know anything about that, he replied quickly. My staff knows the rules. Keanu nodded once. I'm sure they do, he said. That's usually the problem. The manager stiffened. Behind Keanu, a few customers leaned forward, pretending not to listen while doing exactly that. A server paused near the drink station watching. This wasn't private anymore. Keanu lowered his voice, not to hide, but to control. She says she doesn't feel safe. He continued. She says she's being watched constantly. The manager's tone sharpened. That's a serious accusation. So is ignoring it, Keanu replied. Silence spread outward. A spoon clinked against a plate somewhere. Someone cleared their throat. Keanu didn't accuse, he didn't threaten. He didn't raise his voice, he simply stated facts. If you were standing there, who would you believe? The manager exhaled through his nose, irritation creeping through the professionalism. I run a tight operation, he said. If someone can't handle pressure, that's not my fault. Keanu held his gaze. Pressure isn't the same as fear, he said, and fear doesn't come from nowhere. That landed. The manager opened his mouth, then closed it again, because arguing further would only draw more attention, and attention had become dangerous. Keanu stepped slightly to the side, allowing Lena to be seen as she stood near the kitchen doorway. She hadn't realized she'd stopped moving. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her. The room noticed her now, not as staff. As a person, Keanu turned to her gently. You don't have to say anything, he said. Not here, not now. She swallowed hard and nodded. The manager shifted his weight. This is inappropriate, he said. If there's an issue, it can be handled internally. Keanu didn't argue. He simply pulled out his phone, not dramatically, not threateningly. He placed it on the counter. Then let's handle it properly, he said, with someone outside this room. The implication was clear. The manager's confidence cracked, just slightly. A woman near the window whispered, he's right. Someone else nodded. The balance tipped. Keanu picked up the note again and folded it carefully, handing it back to Lena. This was brave, he said quietly. You did the right thing. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Not here. The manager cleared his throat. I think we should take a break, he said, looking at Lena. Go home for the night. Lena hesitated. Keanu spoke before she could answer. She shouldn't leave feeling like this is her fault, he said, and she shouldn't leave alone. The manager bristled, then stopped, because every eye in the room was on him now. Fine, he muttered. We'll discuss this. Keanu didn't press further. He didn't need to. The damage had already been done. The silence that once protected the manager was gone, replaced by witnesses, by awareness, by accountability. Keanu returned to his table and picked up his jacket. As he passed Lena, he said one last thing, not loudly, not for the room, for what it's worth. He said, you mattered before this note. Don't forget that. She nodded, unable to speak. Keanu walked toward the exit. Behind him, the restaurant buzzed again, but not the same way. Something had shifted permanently, and everyone there knew it. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is listen when someone whispers for help. The restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Plates moved again. Orders were called out. People leaned back into their conversations. But something fundamental had changed. Not visibly, not dramatically, just enough to be felt. Lena sat near the back for a moment, away from the counter, away from the noise. Another server handed her a glass of water without saying anything. No questions, no pressure. That alone felt unfamiliar. The manager stayed near the counter, speaking in short sentences now, careful with his tone. He avoided looking in her direction. Avoided looking at anyone for too long. The confidence he'd carried earlier hadn't disappeared, but it had cracks, and everyone had seen them. Lena wrapped her fingers around the glass, grounding herself. Her breathing slowed. For the first time that night, she didn't feel like she had to disappear to survive the shift. She hadn't expected this outcome. She hadn't expected anyone to listen. When she slipped that note onto a stranger's plate, she wasn't asking for a scene. She wasn't asking for revenge. She wasn't even asking for justice. She just wanted the fear to stop echoing inside her chest. Outside, the evening air was cool. Keanu stood near the entrance waiting, not hovering, not rushing her, just present. When Lena stepped outside, he didn't overwhelm her with words. He didn't give advice she didn't ask for. He simply checked in. You okay to head home? He asked. She nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again.
Yeah,
she said quietly. I think so. They stood there for a moment, the sounds of the restaurant muffled behind the door. I didn't know who you were, she admitted. I didn't think you'd ignore me. Keanu gave a small smile. Not proud, not self-satisfied. No one should be ignored when they're asking for help, he said. He made sure she had a safe ride. Not because he was a hero, but because it was practical, because support meant follow through. As Lena left, she glanced back once, not with relief, with something stronger, validation. Inside the restaurant, conversations carried on, but people were different now. A couple near the window spoke about workplace pressure. Another table debated whether they'd step in if they saw something similar. Awareness had spread quietly, and awareness is hard to reverse. If you were there tonight, would you have spoken up sooner? or waited like everyone else.